Good evening, everyone. This is Apostle T.B. Walker. That's who I am. And it is 5 o'clock, and it's Wednesday. So if it's 5 o'clock and it's Wednesday, you know what time it is. It is live at 5. Listen, I'm always glad to be here with you for this midweek infusion of revelation and midweek infusion of the word. This is a really powerful week. This is our Holy Week. You know, as we move into Good Friday coming up in a couple days, and then we have Resurrection Sunday that's coming up. It's really a great time of the year to really begin to reflect on our purpose for being here. Not only what Jesus has done for us, but really concerning, you know, what we're supposed to do for him and what we're supposed to do as believers, as those that are going to manifest his word and his will in the earth. So I want to read something to you because I think, you know, this is really important. And I think it's a bit of revelation that you can kind of chew on your own to really look at some of the things that Jesus did while he was walking the earth that were really fantastic. I want to read this to you because it's in Matthew chapter 8, verse number 29. And I'm going to read this for you in your hearing. It says, "What do you want with us, Son of God?" They shouted. "Have you come to cast here to torture us before the appointed time?" King James Version says, "Have you come to cast us out before the time?" Now, just looking at this, Jesus and his disciples have sailed across the Sea of Galilee. They've entered into a Gentile region, and according to Matthew 8, chapter 8, verse 28, we find out that Jesus is now confronted with two men who are coming out of the tombs, and these men are possessed with demons. We understand that the demons are many because one version tells us that, you know, Jesus talks about the name of the demon. He asked them, and they said, "Our name is Legion because we're many." Now, it doesn't mean that the name of that demon was Legion. Legion means we are many. It is that there's not one name. There's not one demon here, but there are multiple demons. And when you begin to look at this, one of the things that you see that the demons begin to shout out. They cried out to Jesus. They said, "Jesus, you, the Son of God, Son of the Most High," in other versions. It says, "Have you come to cast us out before the time?" So the demons recognize who Jesus actually is. Obviously, they would have known him. Demons are fallen angels who at one time served God. So, and obviously at one point, they would have served Jesus. They would have served the Son of God. They would have served him. So they knew who he actually is. And they call him the Son of God. They actually confirm his identity. But they do a little bit more than just confirming his identity. They confirm that there is a time, an appointed time of judgment. They confirm that they know that there's an appointed time of judgment. They actually also know that Jesus is the one who has power and authority over them. They know that this time of judgment is going to come, and it's going to come in the form of torture, that they're going to be cast out into darkness, but it's for an appointed time. So when you begin to look at this, they recognize not only are they going to be defeated, but they know who's going to be their arch nemesis, who's going to defeat them. They know that the penalty that has already been spoken is going to be enforced. But here's the interesting thing. They know exactly who's going to enforce it. So the demons know that they are doomed, and they know by whom this punishment is going to come. But they say something interesting. They say, "You've come too early. This isn't the time. You know, what are you doing here now?" So when you begin to look at this, they don't fight in any way for the hope of elongation of time. They're not actually even fighting for victory. You know, the point of this is not that the enemy wants to win. The enemy, you know, is trying to defeat God. That's not true. When these demons begin to cry out, it's clear that they know that defeat is certain. What they are looking at is they're saying, there is an appointed time, and there's something that Jesus is doing that they don't know. Remember what I said. They're not after victory. They're trying to drag down as many people as possible. It's like a fighter who, you know, knows that he can't win, but is trying to give as many blows as he can, you know, before he gets knocked out. He knows a knockout is imminent. He knows he'll never raise his hands high in the ring. He knows that he'll never get the belt. But if he's able to give a black eye, you know, if he's able to be able to say, "Yeah, you know, I mean, I pretty much gave as good as I got," you know, he's okay. That's the mindset of a loser. When you begin to look at this, there's a revelation here. They say, "Have you come to cast us out before the time?" They knew judgment was coming, but they did not know that Christ was going to come before this appointed time. Here's the revelation that they received that many of us don't receive. God is bringing judgment. He's coming before the judgment. He came before that time. And what he's doing before the end of the fight, before the end of the war, what the enemy is looking at here is that God is actually coming and bringing an army and bringing that army behind enemy lines right now before the end of time. They knew that they were looking for one great battle, and there was going to, that Jesus was not going to show up until that time. Jesus was saying, I'm here now. They're revealing that we see you beginning to take the enemy's territory before the rapture, beginning to take the enemy's territory before the millennial reign, before the battle of Armageddon, before everything is all over, before the final destruction. They thought we had free reign, and they didn't realize that God was building not only Jesus coming in this form of a man, but he was also building a church of like-minded brethren who were born of the Spirit, who would also go behind enemy lines and begin this fight where the enemy was even unaware. This is a powerful, powerful revelation, and I want you to begin to see this, that the demons begin to see your work is starting before the end. I hope the church gets that as we're looking toward heaven, as we're making up in our minds that the only thing that's worth anything is just leaving this world and getting back to heaven, not realizing God is saying, I'm starting the defeat of the enemy with the cross and with you. And every person that takes up their cross is a part of defeating the enemy before the time. Hope that was revelation for you. And I hope that, listen, this is a midweek infusion to get you started and get you thinking. Again, like I said, we're entering into this Easter season, and I have some questions that have been asked. And, 2 out of the 3, I think, are probably really good Easter questions. But you know what? I think all 3 of them probably would fit in there. So I tried to fit some things that might fit the theme of this particular week, the resurrection, Jesus, who he is, and the truths concerning Jesus Christ, him being crucified and him being resurrected. I want to get the first question out to you so you can see this in the Ask Apostle. It says, if Jesus was to come back to earth, what would he think of Christianity as it is practiced today? Okay, first off, it is not if Jesus will come back to earth, it is when. We are clearly living right now in the last days, and the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking on his second coming. The clock is ticking on the time of the Antichrist. The clock is ticking on the rapture that is going to come. One of the things that I want you to get in this is that the first thing you've got to understand, you've got Jesus a little too far away. The reality is like if he came back, what would he think about the church? Well, he's here. When you begin to look at the revelation that we see in the book of Revelations, in chapter 2 and chapter 3, what it shows us here as Jesus is revealing to John concerning his knowledge of the churches, because these weren't just those 7 churches, it represented all the churches. The Lord is aware right now. He's a living God. He's not waiting to come back and find out what's happening to the church. He is walking among the candlesticks now. That's what he said in Revelation. He says he's here. He's holding the 7 stars. So when you begin to look at that, he's got the church in his hand. So when you begin to look at this, he knows the condition of the church right now. He knows the condition of every believer. He's numbered every hair on our head, so that there's no praise, no worship, no truth, no falsehood concerning our faith or our Christian walk that Jesus is not aware of. And so we recognize that the Great Tribulation is stalking this age, not the church. It's stalking this age. And when you begin to look at that, many people have the same question that you asked. What did Jesus think if he saw the church right now? Would he come into any of these churches if he came back? Well, he's here now. He's walking among churches right now. And, the reality is that he's not shocked that there is a remnant among even those who call themselves by his name. Listen, the Great Tribulation is actually designed for people who do not know what true Christianity is. Designed for people who've rejected Christ, but even there's going to be people in the tribulation who would have thought of themselves as Christians, who have professed themselves to be Christians, but actually were not. And today, many people, as you begin to look at the kingdom, have abandoned the mission that Christ has given the church to preach the gospel. right? To go out into the highways and the byways, to remain literally separate from the world. That's one of the things that many believers have actually forgotten about, and also making people aware of his kingdom, making disciples. So many people are going to church, but there are many believers, there are many people who have literally forsaken the great commandment, the great commission that Christ has given us. So what's the answer to the question? So that I don't go, all around Robin's barn. Here's the thing. I am just a man. It is impossible for me to speak for God. It's impossible for me to really sift through his mind and to be able to say, yeah, here's definitively what he would think or what he would not think. I'll let him speak for himself, because the Lord speaks volumes, in this book concerning people who are professed to be believers, but who really are not a part of his family. He speaks clearly about people who actually call themselves by his name, who prophetically use his name, but yet are not connected to him. Let me read you a scripture here out of the book of Matthew chapter 7, just 2 verses, 21 through 23. And here's what it says. Not everyone saying to me, Lord, Lord, will enter into the kingdom of heaven, but only the one doing the will of my Father who is in the heaven will. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and expel demons in your name and perform many powerful works in your name? And he says, and then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Get away from me. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Let me give you one more, because this is what we really need to do. In the end of the day, Jesus is aware of what's going on. In the end of the day, when he says, I'm coming back for a church without spot or blemish, Jesus actually does have a church that he's preparing. Now, it may not be many of the people that you see. Many of the people that you see may fall into this category. Many of the people that you see who profess Christ or who are not Christians will fall into this category. Many of the churches that you see that call themselves churches that are not churches, it's not shocking to Jesus in any way. He is totally aware of that. But here's what he says. You be on the watch, because he knows. He says, you be on the watch for false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inside are ravenous wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Never do people gather grapes from thorns or figs from thistles. Do that. Likewise, every good tree produces fine fruit, but every rotten tree produces worthless fruit. A good tree, he says, cannot bear worthless fruit, nor can a rotten tree produce fine fruit. Every tree not producing fine fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Really then, by their fruits, you will recognize those men. So, listen, I can't answer definitively whether, if Jesus came back and he saw people who were professing Christ, what would he think about Christianity? Jesus is still aware. The question is, what would he think about religion? Well, he will think about religion what he's always thought about religion. Religion is dead. Unless that religion is holy. And that holy religion is faith in Jesus Christ. That holy religion is abiding by the precepts and principles that are found in this word, in the Bible. That's what makes it holy and unblemished. And you know what? The reality is, because the responsibility is not even on the believer to make themselves unblemished. But the truth of the matter is, if we let ourselves and we stand still, Jesus has promised to cleanse us of all unrighteousness. He's going to present us faultless. So, yeah, he would be as disgusted with modern Christianity, or Christianity as we know it, as many of you are. He'd be more disgusted with it, or equally as disgusted with it as he was with Judaism when he entered the earth. But he would be so excited that there are still those that are called by his name, that are in his hand, that he's still looking at right now saying, Father, thank you. Not one of them have been plucked out of my hand. So believers are going to stay until eternity. Christianity will burn up with the rest of all man-made religions. Hopefully that helps you and that answers your question. Be a believer today, and you watch for the fruit of those, because that's how you'll know them. Not by their profession, not by their church, not by their denomination, but by the fruit that they bear. Let's take a look at question number 2. If God is everywhere, all the time, how could he have abandoned Jesus when he died on the cross? Okay, I get it. The story of the cross is a very moving and very emotional story. And over time, if you hear it preached and as you hear it taught in various places, people have taken some creative license with the story, right? And I get that, and the Lord he turned his back on Jesus. He walked away from him. Jesus looks around and he's all alone. He's by himself. And it does make you moves you to tears. It can be extremely emotional, but it will beg this question. Now, here's the interesting thing. We may have created the narrative that that God the Father left and turned his back, and Jesus is crying out, and the Father's like, "Yeah, well, I can't hear you, because you look like man to me." But the reality is that Jesus never imagined that the Lord had left the room. It was never imagined that the Father, had walked away from Golgotha. That somehow, that in his omnipotence and omniscience, that somehow he used some, thing that only he knew to not really be there, or that his presence was not there. This was part of his plan. And the reality is, if he was not there, even, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. How could that be if he had abandoned them? Father, why have you forsaken me? Lord, why have you forsaken me? Could not be possible. Who's Jesus praying to? So he's praying. He never looks and says, why have you left Golgotha? Why have you left Calvary? Never. What he says is why have you left me in this circumstance so long? Listen, what we forget, and this happens sometimes, in the scripture, it's in Matthew chapter 26, verse 41 through 44. And what you're seeing here is Jesus is negotiating with the Father for his life, and not that, like, I don't want to die, right? That's not really the question here. It's not like Jesus has abandoned the idea of the plan that he's known before the foundation of the world. It's not like, he's been walking around and telling his disciples, this is what has to happen. I have to die. I have to be given up and be beaten. It's not that. It is, the reality is that Jesus is now facing this human ordeal, and he knows that in his spirit, he's willing to do what has been agreed to before the foundation of the world, that he was a part of the planning of. Because in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That is Jesus. He was there at the very beginning. But he also has walked in flesh, and he realizes, I don't know how my body's going to hold up under this ordeal. And because when he comes back to the disciples, here's what he says. He says, watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. He's talking to them about even his personal feelings concerning the cross. Am I going to be able to handle that all night? This is not going to be quick. It's going to be painful. And he says, and he went away a second time and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy, and he left them and went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. What do we have here? 3 times saying the exact same thing. I'm weak. I want to do it, but I'm weak. Is there any way this cup can pass from me? If there's no other way that this cup can pass from me, there's no other way this plan can come about unless I drink of this cup, unless I go through this torment, then your will be done. But then he comes back a third time, and the question is the same. Is there any way? There's got to be some way that I can get around this. Why? Because Jesus is afraid of Roman crucifixion. His human self knows he is human. As a human, he is physically vulnerable here. He knows that I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep up all night. I don't know if I'm going to be able to put on a brave face. I don't know if I'm going to sound like and look like the Messiah that night after what they're going to do with me. But here's what he does. He submits to God's active purpose, right? He knows what the Lord has planned. He submits himself to it. And his question is going to be, how long is this going to be? Am I going to be able to maintain it? And when he cries, this is so hard, not only all night, but in the Sanhedrin court was he beaten, and they bit him, and they ripped him with their teeth. But then he deals with the ordeal with the Roman soldiers, and then they beat him with the cat and nine tails. And then he's got to carry this 100-pound cross up this hill. And now he's actually in the midst of the crucifixion. And with the nails in his hands and in his feet and the piercing of the side. And he does cry out, why have you left me here so long? Not why are you gone, but why have you left me here so long? To deal with this torture. And what he hoped for was that this would be somewhat speedy. That in some way, Lord, you'd be there for me, that will allow me to be able to bear it even unto death. And you know what? He goes into the torture chamber and he endures it. But guess what? The Lord makes this mercifully short. You know, we look at our Easter ceremony. We can kind of forget that because, we somehow need to elongate it for ourselves. We have to have Jesus beaten worse than any other man has ever been beaten. But listen, I don't think you can really guarantee that. Listen, men have done horrible things. And I would imagine that there's some pain and some struggle physically that would rival that may be worse than that. The issue was not whether Jesus was beaten worse than any other human being. No, that wasn't the issue. The issue was that no other person could stand in our place and bear our sin, could absorb the horrible sin that is in man, that would do even with him, to him, what sin does. He's the only one that could do that. But you know what was so amazing is that God answered his prayer. Was he there? Was he gone? Yeah, absolutely. He answers his prayer. Listen, let me show you how God answered his prayer. In Mark chapter 15, verse 43 through 45, here's what it says. Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent council member who was himself waiting for the kingdom of God, coming and taking courage, went into Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. And Pilate marveled that he was already dead. Under most circumstances, this was a process that was even more elongated for other men. Pilate looks and says, now most guys are up there, this could take days. This could take days. Remember, they were even rushing and saying, listen, break their legs because we've got the feast coming up. So they were hoping break their legs so that they would go ahead and die and then we can get to the feast because this was designed to take days. But Jesus is already dead. Pilate marvels that he's already dead, and summoning the centurion, he asked him if he had been dead for some time. So when he found out from the centurion, he granted the body to Joseph. What does that what does that mean? What's the answer there? That means that God was there the whole time. The whole time. And what as we portray this as some mean God who's turning his back and I don't see my son anymore. No, this is God who was there with him the whole way. The whole way. In agreement with the man on the cross, the whole way. With no agreement with the flesh on the cross, the whole way. The spirit takes over because it's willing, but the flesh was weak. And because of that weakness, look what God does. He allows death to come faster than even the Romans expected. So there's mercy in this story that we may not have ever looked at. And this idea of God abandoning his son. Listen, it would be amazing that God would abandon Jesus, but not abandon us. He's promised us, he said, I'll never leave you or forsake you. And if we are the first of these brethren, of his brothers, then he would have to be the same God who would never abandon us in our trials. Even though he doesn't take us out of those trials, he has promised to be with us always, even to the ends of the earth. So I hope that helps with that question. We've got one more. This is our final one. Wasn't it God's preordained will that Pontius Pilate not heed his wife's counsel about Jesus being innocent? If that's true, then he is not guilty of killing Jesus. Wasn't it God's preordained will that Pontius Pilate not heed his wife? Okay. Well, listen, don't pull out the not guilty verdict so fast. We've got to take a look at this. There were some things that were divinely ordained. One of the things that was divinely ordained, prophesied, and written was that Jesus would be crucified. He would suffer, that he would die, and that he would be crucified. That's what was ordained. Pilate's decision not to listen to his wife's counsel was actually an act of his own will. It was actually an act that was totally in his control. When Pilate he doesn't heed his wife, when his wife comes and says, "Listen, have nothing to do with this guy. He's innocent." Pilate makes a decision of his own, and actually indicates that he's not somehow duped by fate. That he's totally in control. Let's look at John chapter 19. And I want to start at verse number 9, and I want to go to verse number 10. And here's what it says. And he went back inside the palace. This is Pilate. Where do you come from? He asked Jesus, but Jesus gave him no answer. And here's what Pilate says. Do you refuse to speak to me? Pilate said, don't you realize that I have power either to free you or to crucify you? No, he was not some victim of that, God's hand was moving him on some, conveyor belt. No, or that, and some ethereal power was working that was beyond his control. No, it's not God's will that we need to look at and see as suspect. It is the will of Pilate that is actually sinister. Here's what he wanted. He wanted the favor of the people. This wasn't a matter of him, listening to a prophet or not heeding some prophet. Pilate was not a believer. Pilate was a religious figure. He didn't even respect the Jews in any way, shape, or form, nor their God. So when his wife comes at him, well, let me read this. Matthew chapter 27, here's what it says. Therefore, when they were gathered together, Pilate said unto them, whom will you that I release unto you? Barabbas or Jesus, which is called Christ? For he knew that for envy they had delivered him. He knew this. As a judge, as a magistrate, he says right here, he's aware that the only reason they brought him was because of envy and because of jealousy. When he was set down on the judgment seat, his wife said unto him, saying, have nothing to do with this just man, for I have suffered many things this day in a dream because of him. But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the multitude, the religious leaders and the people, that they should ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. And when, in verse 27, and when Pilate saw that he could not prevail with them at all, but that rather a tumult, a riot was actually started, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude and said, I'm innocent of the, listen, here's what he said. I am innocent of the blood of this just person. See you to it. Do whatever you want to do. Was this God's will? Pilate was somewhat conflicted, right? You can see that there was some conflict, but he said this just man, right? He knows that this is a just man, and he concedes to this just man being given over to the mob. Not only that, this just man that he confesses is a just man. It is Pilate who says, listen, before he's given over to the mob, go ahead and scourge him, beat him, whip him with the cat of nine tails. This just man. That's what he says. So Pilate's role wasn't like some biblical role. This was not some prophetic role. There was not some divine mandate on his life that, like, whether he wanted to or not, he just had no other option but to kill Jesus. Now, listen, the plan for salvation, for your salvation, the plan for my salvation was fixed. It was set. It was going to happen. And it was going to happen at the hands of man. Jesus was going to be crucified as it was prophesied before Pontius Pilate was ever born. And Jesus did not need Pilate. Listen, this was going to happen whether Pilate, his cousin, his brother Jeffrey, whoever was the governor at that time, was going to go this way. This was going to happen because of the heart of men, not because of the way of God. That Jesus was going to be crucified, no doubt, at the heart of his own creation because of the evil in the creation and not because of some sinister, sadistic plan of the Creator. No, he didn't make Pontius Pilate do it. Pontius Pilate made his own bed, and guess what? He's lying in that bed right now. So listen, my hope is that this was a blessing to you. My hope is that in this midweek infusion that you got some revelation out of this, that this will even help kind of spur you and stir you to begin to look at the Word before we even get to this Resurrection Sunday. This is a time when most of us get to church and, we do what we normally do. We sit back and we let someone else read and give us this revelation. But you know what? Why not this year? You take the Bible out yourself and you read this story yourself. You dig in here and get the revelation concerning this great salvation that Christ died so that we would have. And that would be a great resurrection that would happen before Sunday. Don't wait for the resurrection to happen on Sunday. Don't wait for, the preacher to get started and for you to feel what you're going to feel on that day. Begin to study his word right now so you can get the revelation of how powerful that moment was and still is even until this day. I hope that that's a blessing for you. Listen, do not hesitate. Come on back at 7 o'clock. I have some powerhouses here for our community influencers. I've got Shea Hendricks and I've got Mia Davis. Listen, I'm telling you right now, these are some dynamic women. We've never had two on at one time. We've never had two guests at one time. And then on top of that, we've never had two women on, and never two powerful women ever. This is a milestone for the community influencers, and it's going to be a blessing for everybody that tunes in. So listen, I'm going to ask you to not only, don't forget to share this revelation that's coming out of this particular study, but I want you to come back at 7 o'clock, and I want you to make sure that you share. Tell your friends that they need to lock in tonight at 7, because it's going to be a blessing. Listen, I'll see you in just a little while, and I hope that you have an awesome, awesome Wednesday. God bless you.